talking about the focus group that I'm a part of. So we've only got a few members, but we really want to try and raise the awareness of autistics in that squeezed middle who are being, we feel, harmed by the neurodiversity narrative and are therefore not always, because people are now assuming that autism is just a difference and this whole neurodiversity stuff, and that autism is comes with great gifts and that, you know, it's compensated for and stuff, and how that harms more disabled people, but the ones that whose disability isn't obvious, as I said before, harms them the most, the squeezed middle, who appear as though they're not disabled because it's invisible, but actually are disabled and are in need of support and can be quite vulnerable actually if they don't have, say, family around them and so on, because their needs are less visible than those who have coexisting intellectual disabilities, who are less harmed by the neurodiversity narrative because they can fall back on their intellectual disability, which everyone sees they need support and help, if you see what I'm saying. Autism itself has basically now, many of us feel, well, people at the group I tend to certainly feel anyway, and I'm sure there are other autistics who also feel this in the squeeze middle, has kind of come almost diluted to the point of meaninglessness. And in actual fact, and that's why we need subtypes, the argument is, and in actual fact, one member who said some very interesting things, she also said, which I also feel as well actually, that now, because we're seeing this influx of increasingly very, very able people getting diagnosed autistic, people like Melanie Sykes, obviously she's quite exceptional, but you get the gist. Basically, people who've carved out extremely successful lives for themselves. Now, we're not saying these people don't have struggles. Obviously, they must have struggles, or they wouldn't, you know, consider getting something like a diagnosis. But nevertheless, these are very successful people. They're not, you know, they've obviously have the executive function, the ability, no matter, we're not, you know, obviously they do struggle, but there's a difference between struggling and being able to do something and not being able to do something at all. And they also have the ability to network, like Melanie Sykes has set up a successful business. She's obviously got enough executive functioning to be able to advocate for herself, she's got the power behind her. You know, this is the creme de la creme. I mean, these people do not represent most autistics, and yet they have the voice. And therefore how they use that voice is critical, and it's not helpful when we hear people like Melanie Sykes come out with things such as autism is only a difference. I don't think autism is a disorder. I don't think autism is a disability. It's not helpful, because for people whose autism actually can be experienced as a disorder, and for people whose autism actually is a disability, this narrative can be really harmful and can actually send the wrong message out to government and things, that autism is not serious. So then, people whose autism is a disability have to fight to get their needs met. It's not a case anymore, but just because you've got diagnosis of autistic, you're automatically going to be seen as needing support. In my view, that should be the case, because in my view, autism should be only diagnosed if you're in that case anyway, but because otherwise it just becomes meaningless. So basically then, people whose autism is a serious deal, not those with intellectual disabilities, because they're needs to take care of anyway, because they're so obvious, but people in the squeezed middle then have to basically expend limited, the energy they have, and most of their energy is used up just dealing with their disability anyway, but so you don't even have much energy left, you know, to fight bureaucracy and things like that, which is why many autistics end up not getting their needs met, and there's actually a very high number of autistics on the streets, you know, or in prison, because they don't have support networks or whatever to help them. I mean, if you've got a support network to help you, then, you know, you have to consider yourself really lucky. I'm lucky because currently I've got a support network. I'm not saying that's going to always be the case. There may well be a time when I'm older and I don't, and that's very scary. But currently I'm lucky because I do. But, you know, if you're basically on your own, right, and you're a squeezed middle autistic, basically it's not a pretty picture, because you don't have the energy to fight for your needs, because most of your energy is being spent just getting through the day, you know, which is why many autistics, like as I said, don't get their needs met. But these really successful autistics who aren't as disabled, they have the ability to network to get by in life. They might have great struggles and it might cause them burnout and a whole host of other things. I'm not saying it's easy, but the fact of the matter is they can do it. And then they say it's not a disability. And I'm like, seriously? I mean, okay, if it really genuinely is not a disability for them, and I struggle to see why they get diagnosed if that's not the case, because surely autism is a disability, and if it's no longer a disability, then really something is a little bit wrong, and we need new labels for people whose autism is a disability to really show that they're separate from these other people. But, aside from that, even if it isn't a disability for them, they should have the common sense to basically say that that they don't represent most autistics, to make it very clear that actually they are an exception, which they don't. They tend to come out and say, oh, autism is not a disability, as a statement, which is, really irresponsible. So that, and I think one of you in the comments, I think last time, and I did respond to it, said also that you felt that we need to return to subtypes because autism is very confusing and it doesn't make sense. Why everyone's given this one label of autism. But no, now it's split into three, isn't it? Autism 1, 2 and 3 based upon support needs, but that isn't always very helpful either because it's usually assumed that people who used to fall into the old Asperger's category are automatically going to be level 1, which means very little support needs, but that doesn't make sense because someone could actually have Asperger's in the old sense. Obviously that category is no longer used, but someone could have Asperger's and actually need 24/7 support, say if they're in a mental crisis, for example. So just because someone has a university education and can talk really well and everything, and it's high verbal IQ, doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need a high level of support. So that's a little bit kind of outdated. There's always this idea that disability, how disabled you are, is connected to your ability to speak, if only it was that simple. But that's because of the way Western culture in particular places a great emphasis on the ability to talk and as kind of, and this idea that if you could talk then you've got it all sorted, everything else follows. But actually with autism, the skills are can be, not always, but can be, really, really uneven. And so just because someone can talk really well, it doesn't mean that their other skills are of the same level. I mean, in my case, I have a university education, so people might think, oh, she's got it all sorted, she can handle adult life. Going just by that alone, I can talk really well. And obviously the fact I got a university education, by the way, I only got that because of the huge intensive support I received from my parents as a teenager. If I had lived in a family where I didn't get that support, I wouldn't have gone to university anyway. I didn't do it completely. Once I was a late developer anyway, but I couldn't live in halls, for example. And I was lucky, I stayed at home. And I was lucky because I had everything managed for me, basically. It's like my mum was my full-time cleaner, organiser, everything. So, I had a lot of things taken care of. But that said, I have a university education. Obviously not all autistics are able to do that. But nevertheless, I really struggle with adulting and I need a lot of support. So that goes to show how just because you could talk well and have a university education or whatever, it doesn't mean that all those other skills are going to be of the same level. In actual fact, my non-verbal IQ, I'm embarrassed to say, I shouldn't be embarrassed, it's not like I can help it, I can't help the way my brain is configured, but my non-verbal IQ is basically below 70, okay? That is in the intellectual disabled range. As a kid, my non-verbal IQ was only 53, okay? If that was verbal, I'd have an intellectual disability, but because my verbal IQ is in a highly superior range, as an adult it is now 138 top end 142, okay, which is in a highly superior range. That's my verbal IQ, which is why I can sound intelligent. It doesn't mean I can actually walk a walk and get things done though. I wish it did follow, that's what many people think, and that can actually be again my greatest handicap. Is because people see how well I can talk and how well I can use long words and stuff and know the meaning of long words, and I'm good at logic. People think that it then follows that I know how to, I don't know, change a light bulb, for example. Or even if I'm told how to do something practically, that I don't always retain that information. So people think that everything else is kind of taken care of, whereas my non-verbal IQ as an adult is higher than when I was a kid, but it's still very low. It's now about, something like 68? So it's still below 70. And obviously obviously the most important thing there is, as you can see, is that massive split between a verbal and non-verbal, which is why I don't have a global IQ, because a global IQ would be absolutely impossible, because it wouldn't make sense, because it would both underestimate my abilities and overestimate my abilities. I think if you rounded it up, my global IQ would be something like 90 something, but that isn't a true representation of my intelligence, because part of my IQ is severely intellectually delayed, and another part of my IQ is kind of gifted, so it wouldn't actually make sense. But yeah, that's the thing, and that's my greatest handicap, is that I can appear so intelligent, and yet in some other areas I don't have it sorted at all, and that's the issue, and that's basically quite characteristic of autism, even in people who are often called high functioning. But like I said, with a squeezed middle, because and I do feel, by the way, that these really, really successful autistics, like people like Melanie Sykes, obviously I feel their non-verbal IQ is definitely going to be a lot higher, because non-verbal IQ also measures executive functioning and processing speed, and it's actually a reflection of an executive functioning impairment and also learning difficulties if you have that IQ split, and that in and of itself can cause a lot of difficulties in life, extra difficulties. And those very successful autistics do tend to have better executive functioning abilities. I don't think it's a coincidence that the autistics I know who are more disabled, but in that squeezed middle group, have executive functioning challenges for various different degrees. I think one of the people I know also has a diagnosis of ADHD, which in and of itself can cause very severe executive functioning challenges. I don't have ADHD. My executive functioning challenges are caused by my autism, but it's interesting that those with more severe executive functioning challenges are the ones who tend to be most disabled. But yeah, let me know anyway